This is a webinar covering CALPADS data for students with disabilities in private schools. And most specifically, we're going to talk about the data needed for child count, and we're also going to talk about the data needed to calculate proportionate share, because inevitably those issues always come up. My name is Brandy Howdigi. I'm an information technology supervisor with the Data Evaluation and Analysis Unit in the Special Education Division here at CDE. And if you have questions about the content that I'm presenting here today, please send in a CALPADS support ticket. I know you guys like to email SPED data support directly, but what sending in a service ticket does is it helps the CALPADS service desk understand some of the issues and questions that are coming in. And as you know, we work extremely collaboratively with both the CSIS staff as well as the CALPADS operations staff. So this helps us identify some of those issues. You can download the PowerPoint and materials at the following CDE box link. Milo and my other staff will be putting this link directly in the chat. So please feel free to go ahead and download those materials. Here's a list of acronyms that I will be using ad nauseum today. But most notably, I just wanted to call out your attention because you're going to see these acronyms on virtually every slide. DOR and DOL. DOR is the district of residence, the geographical residence where that student or their parents reside. And then the district of location. So district of location in this context means the location that the private school is located in, or the district that the private school is located in. I'll also be making references to a lot of our CALPADS files for students with disabilities, so SWDS, SERV, PLAN, MEET, etc. Okay. We just put this here for reference, just in case there's an acronym that I'm using that you don't understand. So the goals of today's webinar are to help you understand, as LEAs and SELPAs, hopefully there are CALPADS administrators. If there are CALPADS administrators, if you give me a thumbs up, I'm really hoping that we have some CALPADS administrators here today. Yes, there we go. That's what I love to see that. So number one, who has child find responsibility for private school students? What responsibilities do LEAs have for private school students with disabilities under IDEA? Which data are required to be submitted to CALPADS for these students? Who is responsible for submitting the data to CALPADS for students with disabilities in private schools? And then finally, how can you utilize CALPADS data to calculate proportionate share? All right, so first let's get into IDEA law and guidance. So specifically in 34 Code of Federal Regulations, section 300.131, that is the IDEA code section that references child find requirements for students who are parentally placed in private schools. Additionally, in California, students who are homeschooled by their parents are also considered parentally placed, provided that homeschool setting meets specific criteria. Now, LEAs are required to identify, refer, and assess any student attending a private school within that LEA's boundaries, and what they're assessing for is eligibility for special education and related services. The LEA, where that private school is located, is responsible for locating, identifying, and evaluating students with disabilities who are enrolled in those private schools to determine eligibility for equitable services. Okay, the district of location can meet that responsibility in a variety of different ways. Okay, so in that Office of Special Education Programs Q&A document that I referenced that's in your meeting materials, it specifically outlines 3 ways that district of location can fulfill its responsibility. So first of all, the district of location can say, I am responsible for identifying, identifying and evaluating those students, or they can contract with another LEA, and oftentimes districts of residence and district of location actually have MOUs in place where potentially the district of residence is responsible for doing the assessment for those students. Or they can also contract with a third party to do that location, identification, and evaluation. So we often get asked, we know that the district of location is doing an evaluation, but can the district of residence also do an evaluation? So first of all, the U.S. Department of Education, OSEP, actually discourages this, but if a parent requests that the district of residence conduct an initial evaluation as well, they can conduct that evaluation. But the key here is both the district of location and the district of residence, if the parent requests it, must conduct an evaluation. Now, in order for those two entities, the district of location and the district of residence, to be able to share information about those evaluations, they have to get a parent release. The parent has to sign a release form to allow them to exchange and disclose information about that student's evaluation. So which district is responsible for offering free and appropriate public education? Only a district of residence can offer free and appropriate public education. Okay, so if the student is evaluated by the district of location of the private school and they're evaluated by the district of residence, the district of residence can make an offer of FAPE. If the parent elects to accept the offer of FAPE and attend a public school, then the district of residence would be responsible for submitting that information to CALPADS. But the district of location is only responsible for the provision of equitable services. The district of location cannot offer free and appropriate public education. So it's only equitable services based on that student's proportionate share of services. Okay, so the district of location is responsible for the provision of services through an individualized service plan, or an ISP. Okay, that ISP indicates the equitable services that that student will receive, and the district of location is the only entity that can provide equitable services. And Milo and Thor and Dominic, if you guys see questions popping up in the Q&A related to the content that I'm on, please feel free to stop me and ask me to address some of those questions. So when a student actually has to be reevaluated, if they continue to remain enrolled in the private school, then the district of location is responsible for conducting those reevaluations, except in instances where counties have different agreements, right? They have MOUs and they have separate agreements. So, but in most cases, the district of location is responsible for the eligibility reevaluation for students in private schools. Okay, so I'm going to stop there with respect to the IDEA law and see if there are any questions. Okay, are residential students considered NPS? Okay, so Roxanne, I think what your question might be asking is, are NPS students considered private school students? And if that student was placed in a non-public school, including non-public schools that are residential treatment centers, then that is considered an IEP placement. Now, the only time that a student could be considered enrolled in a private school that actually also happens to be a certified non-public school is when the parent places them there voluntarily and they were not placed through the IEP process. Okay, so in that case, they would be considered enrolled in a private school if they were not placed in the non-public school, the NPS school, through the IEP process. Okay, Monica, for an ISP, which additional pages are required, suggested to use in conjunction with the ISP form? I don't think I can answer this question. So we're going to reserve this one, Monica, because we might have to have someone at the SELPA level assist with that question. What do we do if the district of location keeps refusing to evaluate and sends them to us, the district of residence? Unless you have some sort of MOU, it is actually the responsibility of that district of location. So if you have those issues and you feel comfortable about doing it, please feel free to send us a service ticket and we can address it with, and the first thing I would say is actually talk to the SELPA director for that district and see exactly what's going on. If it does not get resolved that way, please feel free to escalate it and we can try and mediate. Okay, Catherine, we've had LEAs refuse to assess students who do not live in their boundaries, but the private school is in their boundaries. They say, according to their SELPA, they do not assess students that do not live in the boundaries of the LEA. Again, it's very clear in the IDEA law that the district of location is required to assess these students. And Catherine, you'll see that we're going to provide some resources in this webinar that will show which district's boundaries that private school is located in. Okay, looks like all the questions are funneling in. So I'm going to go ahead and continue with the content, and we will, I'll answer more of these questions as we go through. So I want to make sure I get you guys out of here on time. Let's talk about the data reporting. So there are two sets of data, or two requirements really, for which we collect data for students with disabilities in private schools. The first is to identify the child count of students with disabilities. Now, this is key here, in for-profit and nonprofit private schools who were evaluated and found eligible for IDEA Part B services. Okay, so for purposes of child find, you have to evaluate students in for-profit and nonprofit private schools and determine which of those students are actually eligible for services, whether or not they actually participate in special education. Okay, the other requirement is that LEAs calculate proportionate share of equitable services. So this represents a count of students with disabilities enrolled at non-profit private schools who were evaluated and found eligible for IDEA Part B. The key here is they were found eligible. Again, whether or not they're actually participating is irrelevant, okay? As long as they were found eligible and they're enrolled in a nonprofit private school, they're eligible for proportionate share of equitable services. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about students attending for-profit private schools. As I told you, students attending for-profit private schools are not included in your calculations for proportionate share. Okay, but you are required per child find, if there's a private school within your LEA's boundaries, you are required to evaluate that student for eligibility. Okay, so for-profit schools, the difference is that if that student is found eligible, then the district of residence needs to make an offer of FAPE, and the only time that that student is eligible to receive special education services is if they accept that offer of FAPE from the district of residence. Okay, in this case, the district of location cannot offer equitable services because the private school that that student is attending is a for-profit private school. Now, why? Again, you're responsible under child find to evaluate these students. Therefore, you should report those meeting data to CALPADS. Okay, so if the student's been evaluated, because at some point, if they move to a nonprofit private school, then that information would already be in CALPADS that the student was eligible for equitable services. Or if they return to a private school, again, they're eligible for an IEP and for FAPE. Okay. if you are trying to determine, number one, which private schools are within my district's boundaries, and number two, what is the tax exemption status? Are they nonprofit? Are they for-profit? There is a list on the private school data page, and the link to the private school data page is here, and there is a ton of information about private schools. But more specifically, what I'm talking about is these downloadable data files by academic year that contain private school information, including the district of location as well as their tax exemption status. So for 24-25, you can find that list at the link at the very bottom of this page. So it would behoove you, if you've never looked at that list, to take a look at it to identify all of the private schools within your LEA's boundaries. Because you have a requirement to have meaningful consultation with these private schools, and you have to come up with a plan for identifying students that may be in need of special education services. They may be eligible for IDEA. So please make sure that you download that document. We are in the process of having discussions with our private schools data office to try and determine how often this list actually changes, right? Because we've heard anecdotally from some folks that it changes often. But we will go ahead and get more information from our private schools data office, and we'll disseminate that through a frequently asked question. All right, so again, CalCounts, you have to submit data to CalPADS for students who were enrolled at nonprofit and for-profit private schools who were evaluated and found eligible for IDEA Part B services. Okay, so if they're enrolled at a nonprofit private school and they elect to participate on an ISP, you want to report those records. Or if they were evaluated and they're enrolled at a for-profit private school, you want to minimally report their meeting data. They won't be eligible for equitable services, again, because they're attending a for-profit private school, but you want to submit at least their meeting and the outcome of that meeting, which results in a SWDS, SWDS, or special education status. All right, so let's get into the calculation of proportionate share. Many of you are used to calculating proportionate share based on 1 year of prior data, okay? And that, I believe, historically has been CDE's guidance in telling you, you just look at the prior year and you identify these groups of kids based on the proportionate share calculation form. This is changing, okay? So now you're going to actually have to calculate proportionate share using the prior 3 years of data. Okay, so this year, in 25-26, you're going to be looking back at the 24-25, 23-24, and the 22-23 academic years in order to accurately calculate proportionate share. And some of you may be just shaking your heads right now going, what are you talking about? But I'll get into that in just a second. All right, so for the calculation of proportionate share, we need counts of students with disabilities enrolled at nonprofit private schools who were evaluated and found eligible in 3 different categories. First, they were found eligible and they elect to participate on an individualized service plan, or whose parents declined services through an ISP in the prior 3 years. Okay, and they're still declining services. So they were evaluated, let's say 3 years ago in 22-23. They still enrolled at the private school, but the parent continues to decline. Okay, that student has an eligibility period of 3 years, which I'll talk about in a second. The second thing is there are sometimes other reasons that a student will not be on an ISP at that private school. So if they were not on an ISP in the initial year of evaluation and they continue to be enrolled at the private school and they are not on an ISP for other reasons, then that student would also be counted in your private school counts for the proportionate share calculation. Right, so preschool age students. So this was a change in guidance last year. So now preschool age students who are attending private schools should be counted in your proportionate share calculations, provided that the private school that they're attending is, number one, nonprofit, and number two, that private school not only has to serve preschool grade levels, but they also have to serve TK and above. Okay, so minimally, if they have a TK program and a preschool program, you should be counting them for purposes of proportionate share. The guidance on equitable services can be found at the link at the bottom of this page. All right, so which LEA should actually submit the data for private school students with disabilities? District of location is responsible for the submission of data for students that are private school students that are within the LEA's boundaries. Now, there are cases where the district of residence is going to evaluate the student as well, right? So both LEAs are going to evaluate the student. Or in some cases, you may have a local agreement that says district of residence is going to evaluate the student in lieu of the district of location. Okay. In those instances, and this is a change, this is a significant change, district of residence should never submit the enrollment, which means the district of residence, if they're attending a private school in another district, should never request the SSID and create an enrollment. You should not do that. Okay, do not submit an enrollment at a private school, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Okay, so when should the data be submitted for students in private schools? So if the parent or guardian consented to the assessment, so on the parental consent date, you should be sending up a record to CALPADS, so they've consented to the evaluation. Or if the student is not yet 3 years old, so they're a preschool student and they're getting ready to turn 3 and they're eligible for Part B services, it could be the student's 3rd birthday. Or if you have a student transferring from a public school on an active IEP into a private school, it's the date that the student actually enters the private school. You could create an enrollment for that student. Or if they're transferring in from out of state into a private school and they were on an active ISP or IEP. Okay, and that also includes transfers from other private schools where the student was on an active ISP. Okay, so if they're coming into your private school with an active plan, IEP or ISP, you would be required to submit data to CALPADS for those students at that time. All right, if you don't pay attention to any other slide in this presentation, and CALPADS administrators, I'm talking to you. Okay, creating an enrollment. And folks, by the way, a lot of this slide content and a lot of these recommendations and a lot of the guidance that I'm talking about here today is because I tried to do what we were asking you to do, meaning, hey, pull your data from for proportionate share from CALPADS, right? Extract the data, just do it, right? So I actually tried to do it. And what I found out was it's really hard to do it. And that was because primarily you have instances where the district of residence is submitting up private school enrollments so that they can evaluate the student. Sometimes they're enrolling kids at the district level rather than in a private school. Sometimes they're enrolling them in their school of residence. So it was all over the place. Okay, so if you want to be able to accurately extract your data for purposes of proportionate share, and I'm putting this on you, right? The cleaner your data are and the more aligned to this guidance that your data are, it will be much easier for you to pull the data out. So the district of location is the only district that should create an enrollment for a student attending a private school within that district's boundaries. A district of residence should not submit an enrollment, a private school enrollment, unless that district of residence also happens to be the district of location. Okay, and here's what that enrollment looks like. It's an enrollment status of 50. The private school code or private school group code is 00000002. And then following the guidance on the previous slide, for initial evaluations, the enrollment start date would reflect either the date of parental consent, or if the student's not yet 3, it would be the student's 3rd birthday. And then for transferring students, it's actually when they entered the private school. This enrollment represents an acknowledgement of their child find responsibility and that there is a student who is potentially eligible for Part B IDEA within a private school within the LEA's boundaries, and that this student requires an initial evaluation for equitable services, or they were on an existing IEP or ISP and transferred in to that private school within the LEA's boundaries. Okay, so that 002 is an acknowledgement that that student is in a private school in your boundaries. Here's common mistakes, and I just talked about them. I've seen private school enrollments, and again, it was in talking to LEAs when I would see sort of these anomalies, that the enrollment is at the district level, right? They look like they're enrolled in a district level program, or they're actually enrolling the student in their school of residence, even though they're not really attending there. They're actually attending a private school. And folks, we can see this because we're seeing sometimes in their ISPs that they're parentally placed in private school in their setting. Okay, so don't do that. All right, so for students who are eligible and participating, so they're evaluated and they are eligible and participating at a private school within your district, you should submit, number 1, a private school enrollment, a SWDS, a status of eligible and participating, and then because they're participating, they're on an ISP, so a plan type of 200, and then of course you would submit the services associated with that individualized service plan. All right, so what do you submit up for students who are eligible but are not participating? Okay, again, the district of location should submit up the private school enrollment, but in this case, the status is either going to be, or the status is going to be eligible, not participating. So code 2, they're eligible, but they're not participating. The non-participation reason code would either be parent declined or 12, no current plan, future plan expected. So it's either one of those two things. If the parent declines or they won't be on an ISP for other reasons. Please do not use status 3, eligible, not enrolled. That's another reason you guys haven't been able to clearly identify these students, is because a lot of you are using a status of eligible, not enrolled. If you use eligible, not participating with a non-participation reason code of either 11 or 12, it's a lot easier to pull those kids out of CALPADS for purposes of the proportionate share calculation. All right, now in cases, again, where the district of residence evaluates the student due to a local memorandum of understanding, or in addition to the district of location, only the district of location should submit the private school enrollment. That's it. District of location. District of residence should never submit an enrollment at a private school unless that student is attending a private school within the district of residence. Okay, that's it. The reason, folks, is in order to accurately pull out students that you need to count for purposes of proportionate share, is you should be counting those students that are enrolled in private schools within your district. But right now, if the districts of residence are also creating private school enrollments for students that they're evaluating that attend private schools in other districts, that district of residence's proportionate share calculations are going to be wrong. Okay, and they would have to dive a lot deeper in the data to figure that out. Remember, some of you may be saying, yeah, but we have to evaluate them. We need to be able to put their data up in CALPADS. Well, as long as that student already has an SSID, and again, if they don't have an SSID, the district of location should be creating the SSID first. So as long as the SSID exists, a district of residence can submit up a status record, an SWDS record, and a meeting record for that student without an overlapping enrollment. Okay. Because theoretically, if the student's going to continue to attend the private school, the only status that you're going to submit up is eligible, not participating, or not eligible. Okay, that's it. And you don't need an overlapping enrollment to submit up a non-participation status, and you don't need an enrollment to submit up a meet record. Okay, so district of residence, you can still report the data required for child find. District of location is responsible for creating the enrollment and creating those private school enrollments specifically. All right, here's another big one, and this is my CalPADS administrators. One more slide that I really need you to pay attention to. This is a change in guidance for exiting private school enrollments. Before, we told you, and by the way, a lot of the FAQ pages are in the midst of being updated. They will be updated to align with this guidance. So if you've got a private school enrollment, typically we told you, hey, if the student is not eligible, then exit them with an N470. Okay, just do that because they're not eligible, they're not going to be receiving services. So we're changing that. Now we're saying if the student is eligible, even if they're not participating, we do not want you to exit the enrollment. We want you to leave it open for the entire duration of the year. Remember, these are enrollment status 50s. Okay, this is a non-ADA enrollment, so they're not primary enrollments. They don't count for purposes of attendance or courses, etc. Okay, these are enrollment status 50s. We want you to leave those enrollments open for the duration of the academic year, and at the end of the academic year, or at the time where a student maybe exits the private school and goes to another district, we want you to enter an exit code of E170, which is a non-primary enrollment exit. We want you to leave them open. Now, the only exception here is you can use N470 if the student is attending a for-profit private school. Okay, so if they're attending a for-profit private school, you can enter an N470. This is really going to improve your ability to make the distinction right now, because in CalPADS right now, honestly, we can't tell the difference between for and nonprofit private schools. Those enrollments, we just can't tell. And so your way of being able to make the distinction is I'm evaluating the students that is attending a for-profit private school. They're eligible, but they're not going to be participating. I'm going to go ahead and exit that enrollment with an N470 because I don't want to count that kid in my proportionate share. All of the other kids that are attending nonprofit private schools, you leave their enrollments open, exit them at the end of the year with the E170. And it's so funny because I can literally see just the questions popping up into the Q&A. I'll get there, I promise. It's just going to make it a lot easier for you guys to extract these kids. Now, why are we changing this guidance? Why are we telling you to leave it open for the duration of the entire year? Well, again, I tried to extract a lot of these data using the extracts, which we'll go over in a few minutes. And what we found out is all of the extracts in CalPADS, anything you put into CalPADS, you can actually pull out. And, but it's driven mostly by an enrollment. Okay, so if you exit an enrollment with an N470, essentially all of the data that you've submitted for that student has no enrollment to overlap it. Okay, however, if you leave the enrollment open and exit it at the end of the year with an E170, then the extract logic says, oh, this student was enrolled at this private school for this duration. So we're going to pull all of the meet records. We're going to pull all of the plan records that were associated with the student, all of the status records for this student. It's much easier to extract the data that way if you leave the enrollment open. Okay, it's irrelevant for for-profit private schools. Again, you can use the N470 because you don't want to count those kids in your proportionate share calculation anyway. Right, so there are 2 times that we utilize the data for students with disabilities in private schools, and we harvest them. You're required to certify them. The first is fall 1 child count. Okay, Fall 1 child count is literally only certifying students in private schools that were found eligible and are participating on an individualized service plan. Okay, and that's in Fall 1. You're required to annually certify that. This year, it'll be certified in January. I believe it's January. And then again, although it's not used for purposes of federal reporting, you have to extend the offer of FAPE to students attending for-profit private schools. And what we don't expect that you certify those data, but you're required to submit the fact that you evaluated those students to CALPADS. So that's a meet and a status record. Then end of year 4 is when we take the data for proportionate share. Okay, or you're required to certify the data for proportionate share. And that represents, again, students who are enrolled in nonprofit private schools who are evaluated and found eligible, even if they're not participating. And that the window opens in May, you certify those data in August. Now, there is no proportionate share report in end of year, but all of the data that you could use for proportionate share can be extracted through operational data store, or now they're called real-time extracts. Okay, so we're into the next section, and there's a lot of questions. I'll try and address some of them. Jennifer at 114, does FAPE need to be offered and declined before an ISP can be offered? No. Jennifer, if they're attending a private school in another district of location, that district of location can offer services through an ISP. FAPE doesn't have to be offered and declined before the services can start for that student, particularly if they're eligible. Joy Gladden at 115. If a child is enrolled in a private school and parent declined the initial ISP offer, is the district of location still responsible to reach out when the triennial would be due? You should reach out to offer a reevaluation. If the parent declines at that time, then the student would no longer be eligible if they don't consent to the reevaluation of the student. Audrey at 115, how should we be documenting when parents decline an initial offer of FAPE, but would like to leave the door open to enroll in a public and accept the IEP later? Sign with exceptions or check the I decline the initiation of special education services box. Our attorneys say I decline is shutting the door to accept in the future, and that this will require a new evaluation be conducted. Audrey, can you just do me a favor and submit this as a service ticket, because you always submit really good questions and I want to give a really, really thoughtful answer. So if you could submit a service ticket, that would be great. Thank you. All right, Regina Piper at 120. If custody agreement determines that residency is shared 50-50 or 60-40 between two districts, how is a district of residence that generates an offer of FAPE determined? Oh, again, Regina, I'm going to have to reach out to some of our consultants because I do not know the answer to this question. So if you could submit a service ticket, that would be amazing. Brian Markentel at 123. My assumption, proportionate share includes non-participation reason code 11, formerly plan type 700, but does not include NPR 12, formerly plan type 800. It actually could include 800, depending on how your LEAs are using it, Brian. So if they're eligible and then there's no current plan, but a future plan is expected, and that's the continued status of the student, because that student was evaluated, is eligible, is still attending a private school at the end of the year, then they should be counted for purposes of proportionate share. It's just, I think the reason you're asking that is because it's not other anymore. we were kind of using it for a different reason. Yeah, there are significant gaps, and I'll talk about, well, and you know what we're doing to try and bridge some of those gaps, Brian, but I'll talk about that a little later in the presentation. Okay. Albina Kavalova at 127. If the initial is held by the district of residence only and the student does not have an SSID yet, how should I proceed? Okay, so an initial is held by the district of residence. They haven't obtained an SSID. If the student is attending a private school in a different district, then that district of location should submit a private school enrollment to CALPADS. That's definitely what I would recommend. District of location submits the private school enrollment. Once that SSID exists in CALPADS for that student, the district of residence can actually submit up their meeting information. They can submit up their status information once the student is evaluated. Okay, Anonymous at 128. What if the private school is an out-of-state online private school, but we are still the district of residence? So because you're a district of residence, you are obligated to evaluate the student and make an offer of FAPE. If the parent declines the offer of FAPE, because the private school is located out of state, this is a tough one. If it's out of state, I would think that that district, it falls under its own IDEA child find requirements within the state that it's located. But the district of residence should still conduct an evaluation. Okay, so he was already eligible. He left our school. So you've met your requirements, Jamie. Okay, let me go ahead and continue, and then I'll get to some more of these questions in a little bit. All right, so how do we use CALPADS data to calculate proportionate share? So first of all of the calculations that LEAs do for proportionate share are found on the IDEA 611 and 619 proportionate share calculation forms. So you will see this link here. These are the most recent forms that are posted on CDE's website. I will tell you that our fiscal unit is right now going through a revision process of these forms to try and make them a little easier to understand in conjunction with the information that you're receiving in this webinar. So also inevitably we get this question. So IDEA proportionate share calculation form 611 and 619 do have some overlap. Okay, so 611 captures proportionate share for ages 3 to 5, and 619 captures information on students 5 to 21. So there is going to be a little bit of overlap for some of those, 3 to 21. And so you are going to get some overlap of those students, and they are duplicative, and it is intentional. All right, so what are the data that we need to put on each of these forms? Okay, so each of these forms, if you take a look at the form, there's section A and there's section B. Okay, so section A on both the 611 and 619 forms just asks a really basic question. So what is your count, your child count? And that is students on the 611 form, it is students ages 3 to 21 who are enrolled at the SELPA members, because SELPAs are the ones that submit this, enrolled in the SELPA member LEAs and were eligible and participating in special education on census day. So it's a census day count, it's your child count, ages 3 to 21 on an IEP. 619, it's the same thing. So it's census day count, but in this case, it's ages 3 to 5, and they were on an IEP on census day. They were eligible and participating. So that's what you need for item A. It's the child count, total child count. All right, now item B, that's where it gets a little complicated. What you're putting in item B is your private school students with disabilities child count. Okay, so this child count includes, on the 611 form, students ages 3 to 21 who were enrolled in non-profit private schools within the LEA's boundaries anytime during the prior year, so 24-25. And when I say, so they were still enrolled, they could have been evaluated 3 years ago. They were still enrolled in 24-25. And either they were participating on an ISP at that private school, or they were evaluated in 24-25 and the parents declined, or they weren't on an ISP for other reasons. So they were eligible, but the parent declined, or they're not on an ISP for other reasons. And the third category is students in 23-24 or 22-23 that were evaluated, parents declined, or they weren't on an ISP for other reasons, and they continued to remain enrolled at that private school up until 24-25. Okay, so that's when the 3 prior years comes in, is in item B. For the 619 form, it's the same data except for ages 3 to 5. Okay, so why are we making you go back and identify students with disabilities that were in private schools in those prior years? And it's, they remain in the private school, parent continues to decline. Bottom line is it was a result of some litigation brought by the Catholic Diocese, and they were alleging that the department and LEAs were underreporting their proportionate share counts. And so the U.S. Department of Education and OSEP identified an area where we were deficient, which is that if a student continues to remain enrolled in that private school during their initial eligibility period, remember, every student with disabilities has to be reevaluated after a 3-year period. Okay, are they still eligible for special education services? So presumably they've got a 3-year eligibility period. So they're initially evaluated, they continue to remain enrolled. They are technically still eligible until they're reevaluated and say the parent says, or the parent says, no, I don't want a reevaluation. So we've got to count those students for a period of 3 years as long as they remain in the private school. All right, so which report should you use in CALPADS for item A, which is your total child count? This one's easy, folks. Report 1614. This is your Students with Disabilities Plan student list. Okay, it's your Fall 1 report, your certified child count. For each of these forms, again, you're using prior year, so 24-25, and you're going to filter for the different age groups for the 611 form and 619. So 3 to 21 and then 3 to 5 for the 619 form. Their plan type should be IEP. And here's one small tidbit of information. When you download form report 1614, you need to filter out any student that has an enrollment in a private school. Okay, so because again, you're looking for your total child count. You want to eliminate any student on an IEP that's enrolled in a private school. And here's why. Typically, when we see students with a plan type of IEP with a private school enrollment code, it's when that student is on an IEP per a settlement agreement. Students that are on IEPs per settlement agreement, even if they are enrolled in a private school, should not be counted for purposes of your proportionate share calculations. Okay, so once you download that, and again, we're looking for kids on IEPs, remove all the students in private schools, that represents your child count. Okay, a graphical depiction of the filters, right? So you're going to look for IEP for education plan type. You're going to select ages 3 to 21, and this is specifically for the 611 form. All right, now item B, you're going to have to pull those data a little differently. You're going to have to pull those data using what we call real-time extracts. We used to call them operational data store or ODS extracts. There's 2 of them that you need, okay? The first is the SSID enrollment download. Okay, this is basically you being able to extract all of your student enrollment records for a user-defined period of time. Okay, so you're extracting enrollments for a period of time. And you can specify that you want to pull out private school enrollments, and you want to take a look at the private school enrollments. The other one is the SWDS eligibility download. So this is all data for students that were enrolled during certain periods of time at your LEA, and it also allows you, again, to identify the statuses for students with a private school code of 00002. Okay, so you can take the SWDS records. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Remember I talked about the fact that we want you now to leave your enrollments open for the private school enrollments at nonprofit private schools. We want you to leave them open for the duration of the academic year. Okay, so this piece is only going to work if you do that for the last 3 years of private school enrollments. Okay, so what it may require, and again, you can choose to utilize CALPADS data, or you can choose to utilize data within your special education data system to identify these kids. But if you're choosing to use CALPADS data, I'm telling you the best practices in order to accurately pull it out. So what it may require is that you go back and you look at all of the private school enrollments that you submitted. And for those that were enrolled at four nonprofit private schools, it may require modifying the exit code. So I'm talking to my CALPADS administrators here also. Modifying the exit code rather than an N470, using an E170 and using an end date of the school year for that particular academic year. So, and what we're talking about here is 24-25, 23-24, and 22-23. Many of you don't have a whole bunch of these kids, so it should not take a whole lot of time, but if you want to accurately be able to pull the data out using these extracts, that is my suggestion, is go back and make those enrollments overlap the entire academic year. And that way, when you're pulling the extracts, it'll pull the SWDS that overlaps that particular academic year for that student. Okay, so when you're pulling these extracts, and we haven't really gone over these a whole lot in the special education realm, but when you're, and I'll by the way, I'll give you a demo in just a second. But what's really imperative is, remember, when you're downloading these extracts, they come in the form of CSV files, which is big text file, right? And the headers aren't there, and it's just difficult. So in the CALPADS user manual, there are templates, and specifically the SENR and SWDS templates are available at the links on this screen. That's the first thing you want to do. Download those templates, because when you get these extracts, you want to put them into those templates. All right, so what I'm going to do now is give you a real quick demo of some considerations that you need to have when you're pulling these extracts. So let me change my sheet, please share. Go. Okay, there we go. All right, so here we are. Hopefully you can see my CALPADS screen. All right, so you'll see on the left-hand navigation bar, you'll see the option for extracts. Okay, what we're looking for here are what are called real-time extracts. They used to, again, be called ODS extracts, but we're calling them real-time extracts. And remember, we're looking for two: the SENR or the SSID enrollment download, and then the SWDS eligibility download. Okay, so when you pull up the screen, you'll notice, and I'm sorry, ABC Unified, you're always the first district, so the one that pops up. What you want to use is the date range option. Okay, so you want to pull data by date range, and you're looking for enrollment start dates from, again, 3-year period. So in this case, we would say 7/1/2022 all the way to 6:30, 2025. Okay, we're looking for that 3-year span. Also, in the available schools here, we want to look for private school enrollment. So you're going to move over private school group. What this is going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you to pull out any enrollments, and this actually includes all your N470s, by the way. It'll be any student that's enrolled in a private school within your particular district between these dates. Okay, any of those students, and then you would just request the file, and you could come back and download it and upload it into the particular template. Okay, the other thing I wanted to show you was SWDS eligibility download, because it's a little bit different. Okay, you'll notice here at the top, we've got 3 options: active student, date range, and non-participating SWDS effective range. Okay. What I will tell you is that this allows you to download. So the date range right now is only going to allow you to pull SWDS records for private school students. Okay, so you can move that over there. Private school students, if they were enrolled between these dates. Okay. If you pull this, it's not going to pull any statuses for students that had an exit code of N470, because there's no enrollments that overlap that particular SWDS, right? Because you used N470, which is why I'm making a recommendation that you go back and change the N470 to an E170 and have it span the entire academic year, because then you will be able to extract those SWDS records. This third option we created specifically because we know you have those N470s. And so what this allows you to do is take out all of the non-participating statuses. So the non-participating statuses are eligible, not participating, eligible, not enrolled, or not eligible. You can pull all of those records, and rather than looking at enrollment start dates, you can pull the SWDS effective start date range. So you can do this as well, folks, but I would strongly recommend that you modify your data and pull it by date range. That way you get the data associated with those private school enrollments. And then, of course, you would request the file and download it and then upload it into the particular template. All right, so once you've got both of those sets of data in each of those files, you've got your SWDS, you've got your SENR. What you want to do, and by the way, if you want to load the extracts into the templates and you're not really sure how to do that, CSIS put together a great video on how to move the data from that CSV file into one of the templates, and it's at this YouTube link. But what you want to do is you want to import those 2 sets of data into one spreadsheet. Okay, we want them on separate tabs. So you want your SWDS data and your SENR data. And here's where you're going to do a match. You want to look for the same SSIDs for those private schools to determine whether or not they count for purposes of proportionate share. Now, what you will notice on this slide is that I'm asking you to look also for kids with a status of 3, eligible, not enrolled, even though earlier I said, don't use that status. Well, the reason that I'm telling you to look for it in these cases is because some of you did use those statuses for those kids in prior years, and those kids might still count for purposes of proportionate share. Hopefully that will change over time, and maybe we can in the future create some sort of validation to prevent you from using that status for students that are enrolled at private schools. But for now, you will have to at least evaluate those students. Okay, private school data scenarios. So as you guys know, we have our file submission scenarios for all sorts of stuff. And what we've learned as we were putting together this webinar and as we were talking with a group of our colleagues is that those scenarios are not complete. And so we are working on a whole new set of data file submission scenarios specifically for private school students. So I'm hoping that we'll have something available for you by the end of November, and then we can share it out during the office hours and eventually get it posted on our website. All right, real quickly, we're going to go over some common errors for private school students, and these haven't really changed significantly. So SENR 0472 is invalid enrollment status for private school groups. So it occurs when you have a school of attendance of 002, but you're trying to use an enrollment status of primary or secondary or short term. Remember, always use enrollment status 50 for private school enrollments. SENR 0556, which is invalid school for non-ADA enrollment status. So if you're going to use an enrollment status of 50 and the students in grades preschool through 12, then it should be a private school enrollment. Okay, you must have a school of 002. SENR 623F1. This occurs when you have an enrollment at a private school, so you've created a private school enrollment, but there's no plan records in there indicating that they're on an ISP, or there's no meeting records indicating that they've been evaluated for some reason. So if neither of those things exist, you're going to get SENR 623F1. Okay. So you just need to make sure that they have at least one meet record or a plan record from the same LEA where that enrollment is. Plan 664F1, which is missing private school enrollment record for education plan type ISP. So if you've got an ISP, got a plan record, but you don't have a private school enrollment, then something is amiss. So if you've got, you will probably need a private school enrollment. This typically happens when an enrollment is deleted after the ISP records are submitted. All right, so our key takeaways from today, and then we'll get into some questions. Number one, only districts of location should be submitting private school enrollments for students attending private schools within their district boundaries. That includes students that are being evaluated at nonprofit and for-profit private schools. Districts of residence should never submit private school enrollments unless they also happen to be the district of location for that private school. Okay, so the other two key takeaways. Private school enrollments for students attending nonprofit private schools should be left open for the duration of the academic year, exited at the end of the academic year, and then, exited at the end of the academic year. Private school enrollments for students attending for-profit private schools can be exited with N470s. Right, there are some changes that will be coming in the future. We have put together a proportionate share work group comprised of SELPAs, local educational agencies, members of our fiscal unit here in special education, the CALPADS office, your vendors. All of your vendors are participating in the private proportionate share work group. And the objective of this group is to identify ways to improve the data we're collecting in CALPADS for purposes of proportionate share and making it easier for you guys to get the data out. But it also may impact your special education data systems at some point. There may be changes that your vendors have to implement in order for you to be able to collect and identify these students on an annual basis. So we're hoping that we will have some proposed recommendations by the end of the academic year. Okay, but as you know, the wheels of CALPADS turn very quickly. So if there are any changes that we are proposing to make in CALPADS, it, number one, has to go through a process. Those changes typically take about a year to implement. And even if we propose a change, it does not mean the CALPADS office is going to say, okay, let's do it, right? So just keep that in mind. We do have some resources for you. Again, if you have questions about the content, or this is the other thing, if I'm not able to get to your questions in the Q&A, please submit a service ticket. Take your question, put it in a service ticket, and I'll try to get those answered. My team will try to get those answered We are kind of inundated right now because we just released the data quality analysis. But if we're not able to get to your question, please submit a service ticket. The Equitable Services guidance on CDE's website, there's a link to that here. The private schools data web page, IDEA guidance. So I put that Q&A document in the meeting materials, but the direct links to the private schools information and specifically that Q&A, those links are here. The CALPADS special education file submission scenarios, we're going to be updating those with specific private school scenarios. And then we do have a couple of FAQs, by the way, those are going to be need to be updated as well. All right. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and start answering some more of these questions because it looks like you guys have a lot of them.
Hey, Brandy, this is Dominic.
Hi.
I think maybe we could have used this presentation too before. There's a lot of, I'm sorry, there's a lot of questions that we haven't been able to answer, haven't been able to get to, but we have been trying. I just wanted to clarify.
No, it's okay. And I was just telling Milo that actually before we started this webinar. It's like, I should have given this presentation to you guys first. Okay, yeah, no problem. All right, anonymous attendee at 128. Is ELA required for private school student enrollment in CALPADS? Our SIS team is saying we are missing, but this is the first time this has been an issue. ELA, what does that mean? Like ELAS? Are you talking about the English language acquisition status? Anonymous at 128. And so essentially it does do, I'm just theorizing that this is what you're asking. Are students that are enrolled in private schools required to take the initial LPAC? And are they, the answer is no. So just make sure, again, they have a private school enrollment, because private school enrollments do not get sent over for initial LPAC testing. So you have to have enrollment status 50 and a private school enrollment. But no, students in private schools are not eligible for the LPAC unless they're on an IEP. Then that's different. So if that's the case, please send in the service ticket and we'll advise you. Sherry Roberge. Hi, Sherry. At 128. Question about who reports enrollment and SPED data. Our SELPA has an agreement that if the district of location and district of residence are both in our county, the district of residence does everything, including reporting enrollment files. If we have an agreement within our SELPA, is this okay? So the problem with this, Sherry, your local agreements, if that's what you've got, that's fine. The problem here is when you're trying to extract proportionate share data and private school enrollments and the proportionate share that has to be set aside by the district of location, if the district of residence is reporting it, it's going to skew those calculations unless you do something with the data. So if you choose to do that, you can, but I would not advise that you use CALPADS data to calculate proportionate share. So that's one of the reasons. Again, we're making these recommendations to make it easier. If you guys choose to do that, you can do that. The problem is that you cannot extract those private school enrollments at the district of residence, and the district of residence, those private school enrollments would not be counted towards the district of residence proportionate share. You would have to do it manually somehow. So, but that is up to you. Anonymous at 132. Is this change, slide 26, 27, effective now or starting next school year? So let me see if I can. And it was slide 26. Okay. So I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. We would prefer that you put these in effect now. If it's not feasible, it's fine. Again, the recommendations that I'm making are to make it easier for you to calculate proportionate share. If you're not going to implement these procedural changes this academic year starting now, then I would not advise that you rely solely on CALPADS for your proportionate share calculations. That's all I will say. Anonymous at 132. Does timeline noncompliance also apply to ISP students, such as overdue plan reviews? So if the student is on an active ISP, they are required to be reviewed annually, right? So yes. Anonymous at 133. In cases where there's a local MOU and the district of residence assesses, how does the district of location submit the private school enrollment if they do not know of the student because the parent does not seek a service plan? Okay, so this is another thing that we had our initial proportionate share work group meeting about a week ago. And this was one of the questions that came up. It's like, okay, well, district of location doesn't know that the district of residence is assessing that student, and they don't have any type of communication. But remember, the district of location is required to conduct meaningful consultation with the private schools within their boundaries. Okay, that is a process that you as an LEA are responsible for setting up, right? You have to work with specific contacts within those private schools to identify those kids. And that's how you should be submitting the enrollment. Okay, the district of residence, if they know that student is attending a private school in another district, they should also reach out and say, hey, we're evaluating this student, but because they're located in a private school within your district, we need you to submit up an enrollment so we can submit up the evaluation data, period. That's it. It's easier said than done. I get it, but that's part of the meaningful consultation process. Okay, Jean Liu. How should we report a private school student who the parent opted to receive reimbursement payment from the eligible ISP? So sounds like this might be a settlement agreement. Jean, I don't know how to answer this question, so could you submit it as a ticket, please? All right, Anonymous at 134, just confirming, we are still required to provide speech-only services to private school students ages 3 to 5 because they are still required to get those services federally, even if they're attending a private school or transitional kindergarten. And Tamara and Teresa answered correctly, and the answer is yes. So if they are found eligible and they require speech services, then the district of location is required to provide equitable services, speech and language services for that student because they're attending a private preschool within the boundaries. But again, here's the caveat. They're eligible for proportionate share at a private preschool if that preschool serves at least preschool and TK grade levels. They can serve like preschool to 8, but they have to have at least one additional grade level, and that could include transitional kindergarten. Carrie Novo at 135. If the private school student has a reevaluation due, student is eligible, not participating, we need to have an assessment plan signed and the parent bring the child in to assess. We have one coming soon, and we have not been successful at getting a hold of the parent sign to agree to the assessments. Would we need to use a delay code if not signed? So remember that for parents who declined, so they were eligible but not participating, they actually were never participating in special education. So if you're trying to reevaluate them, technically that reevaluation is another initial assessment because they never participated. Reevaluations are for students who are participating in special education, and you have to reevaluate them every 3 years. In this case, these students were eligible, the parent declined, they were never participating. So it would technically be like another initial, and the parent would be required to consent to that assessment. So if they don't consent to the assessment, then you would just submit up a status of not eligible, because if they don't consent to the initial assessment, then they're technically not eligible anymore. So their status would change from eligible, not participating, to not eligible unless they signed the consent for assessment, and then you could conduct the subsequent initial or reevaluation. Are SIS vendors aware of the change from N470 to E170? So, Shelley, no, we have not brought this to the attention of the SIS vendors, but we meet with them on a biweekly basis, so we can certainly make them aware that we're advising of this change in guidance for those. But here's the thing, like, your SIS vendors should not automatically be exiting these enrollments with N470s, because even before we said, if they're on an ISP, don't exit them, leave them open. Okay. The only time you're exiting those enrollments with an N470, those private school enrollments, is, you know, our previous guidance was when they're not eligible or the parent declines. Okay. So the SIS should not be automatically exiting those with N470s. So, but we will let the SIS vendors group know this. Lou Spurbeck at 137. If the district of residence can submit plan and meet records without an overlapping enrollment, they would need to know the SSID that the district of location creates. But LEAs cannot discuss or share student information. I'm assuming that the district of location will need to get a parent guardian release to share the SSID at a minimum. Am I understanding that correctly? So, Lou, I'm not sure what your role is within your district, but district of location, again, with meaningful consultation, should be creating enrollments for all students enrolled in private schools that might be eligible for special education and related services. Okay, that's the first thing. Even if the district of residence does hypothetically just go ahead and create that SSID or request an SSID for the student, remember that there's a process that they have to go through where it will identify when you've created a multiple identifier, right? So at some point they'll know, oh, the district of location already created this SSID and this is the correct SSID. So even if you can't share that information, there are mechanisms within CALPADS, although creating a MID is not one we prefer, but that there is a mechanism by which they could find the SSID. And they can look up by doing a manual search as well. Right, Natasha, good suggestion. Right, Lauren Sorensen at 137. If a student is on an IEP within our district and then transfers to a private school outside our location, we usually change our SWDS to eligible and not enrolled if the special education record is not requested by another district. Should we change this procedure? So if they're moving outside to a private school outside of your district, it's actually okay to use eligible, not enrolled, because they were eligible on an IEP, they're no longer enrolled, they've moved to a private school. So no, I think that's an okay practice. Now, once the student moves into the private school, if the parent declines services on an ISP, then that district of location should submit up a SWDS of eligible, not participating, with the appropriate non-participation reason, right? We don't want you to keep using eligible, not enrolled. But if you're the district of residence and they leave to a private school in another district, then the use of that status is okay. Anonymous at 140. Can we exit with a future date for those with E170 by using the last day of school, or will this cause an issue? So I believe that you are allowed to exit students at least 6 months in the future. I don't know that it's advised, though. Typically, it's probably best practice to do it around the time that the academic year will end. But I believe procedurally, as long as it's not more than 6 months out, I think you can do it. It's just not advised. Okay, Anonymous at 145. To confirm, if the district of residence does the evaluation due to an MOU, the district of residence must reach out to the district of location so that they can report the data to CALPADS. Okay. The key word here is MOU. So you guys have an agreement that the district of residence is going to conduct the evaluation. Part of that agreement is making sure that the district of location is creating the necessary information for that student who is located within their district boundaries, so that the district of residence can submit up the evaluation information. Okay, so the answer to that question is yes, and that should be part of your MOU. Anonymous at 146. Man, there's a lot of anonymous people here today. What is a student with disabilities? What if a student with disabilities is attending a preschool at the district where they have to pay tuition? Should that student be enrolled in school 002 private school group? Great question. And anonymous at 146, I will ask you to submit a service ticket because we're gonna have to ask. This is a really good question, and I don't know the answer. Okay, Debbie Connor at 149. We also have a student that a parent pulled from public school and enrolled their student with disabilities into an online-only, offshore-based private school. Parent does not engage in service offers or communications. We'd like to hear clear guidance on if we need to set aside proportionate share funds for this student. Yeah, and again, Debbie, send in this ticket as well. I know we've already got one that's related to this, but online private schools is an area that I'm going to have to check with our consultants on, because I'm not sure what the rules are here. So yeah, if you could submit a ticket, that would be amazing. Carrie Newley at 149. Besides non-participation reason code 11, a student could potentially start in public school in an IEP and then leave for private school. Does it follow then the non-participation reason would be 28 cessation of services until an ISP is offered by the district of location and consented to by the family? Yeah, right now that is the only option. So again, I talked about that private school work group. These are some of the issues that we're talking about. We believe that we're going to have to add additional non-participation reasons to accurately capture these data. I'm just giving this webinar and guidance based on what currently exists in CALPADS, because we can't make any changes structurally or architecturally this year and potentially even next year. Okay, Ara Abing at 152. If parent declines the triennial or no response to the offer of a reevaluation, but they remain in private school, are they exited and not counted at that point? Right. So again, remember, it's for these kids, if the parent declined services, they were never participating in special education. Okay, they were evaluated at the private school, they're not participating, and then that 3-year period comes, and you're calling it a reevaluation, but technically it's a subsequent initial after 3 years. If you don't get parental consent for that initial, then you could submit up a status of not eligible, parent didn't consent to the assessment. Anonymous at 158, to clarify, only go back and change on student from our district of location. No enrollments that we may have entered as DOR, correct? Yeah, that is my advice. So if you're trying to calculate proportionate share this year, look at the last 3 years of data. If you have private school enrollments for students who you assessed but were at private schools within other districts, you should not have those enrollments. Yeah. But you should ensure that the district of location actually has a private school enrollment. I mean, you can't technically ensure that, but notifying them would be nice. Okay, anonymous at 158. Why do extracts show multiple academic years when specifying a date range? When this happens, do we remove the academic years that are not part of the date range selected? Also, for the SWDS extract, should we select all or most? Oh, that's sort of good questions. Okay, sometimes, specifically for the SWDS extract, remember that some of these statuses could have been effective years and years and years ago, and they've just persisted, right? So the academic year that you're seeing in those files is directly related to the status effective start date. So let's say they had an effective start date of the 2018-19 academic year. Well, you're going to see an academic year of 2018-19. But if you're pulling the SWDS data, and you only want to pull, I believe, the most recent. Okay, so you only want to pull the most recent rather than pulling all, which will give you all of the students' SWDS records. Because what you want to do is you want to pull the most recent that occurs within that enrollment period. Okay, so it is possible that a student's status is the most recent, has an academic year of 2018-19 because the effective start date was in the 18-19 year, but that's the most recent record. So no, do not get rid of those. Don't even use academic year. Okay. Autumn Irvin at 159. This may be a silly question. You don't ever ask silly questions, Autumn. Anyway, how do we effectively demonstrate a student being on an ISP but not receiving services because the district doesn't have proportionate share monies? Let's see, the plan file cannot exist if the status equals eligible not participating. Is that correct? Right. So if a student's not participating, we would not expect to see an ISP record. You can only see a plan record with plan type ISP if the student's actually on an individualized service plan. They would also not have services, but we are forced to affirm a service in SACE. Yeah, this may actually be more of a SACE issue than our issue, because we don't, if they're not on an ISP, I mean, you can make the offer of equitable services, but it would not result in a plan record or a service record up in CALPADS. Okay, Lisa Nakutin, I'm confused with the guidance of keeping a private school enrollment open for the entire school year. If the enrollment is entered in order to report initial eligibility, if the parents do not accept an ISP, shouldn't the enrollment be removed? I thought this private school enrollment without an ISP caused a CALPADS error. So it will not cause an error, Lisa, as long as there's either a meeting record or a plan record. Okay, so if they have an active ISP, or if there was a meeting held to show that they were eligible not participating. But I realize that it's confusing, but it makes sense if you're trying to track data for proportionate share. Okay, so here's what it fundamentally boils down to. Okay, that enrollment is a representation that the student is enrolled in a private school within your district. Okay, it's not a representation of they're enrolled in your private school, a private school within your district, and they're receiving services from your district. It's that they are enrolled in that private school. So because they are enrolled in that private school during the duration of the academic year, just leave it open. Exit it at the end of the academic year. Okay, Corey Stacy at 202. If an initial evaluation is being completed for a private school student living and attending a private school in 2 different LEAs, but the student does not qualify for special education, then none of this applies, correct? So when you say does not qualify, Corey, meaning the student hasn't been referred, or if you could just kind of follow up with that. So if they've been evaluated and they don't qualify, you should still keep the private school enrollment open. That's what I would advise, because right now that's the only way we can tell the difference between, or you could tell the difference between, okay, so if they don't meet the eligibility requirements, I would still advise that you keep it open. And if they were at a nonprofit school, the only time I would say just go ahead and And you're right. If they don't qualify, they don't even qualify. They're not counted for purposes of proportionate share. So, but there's no harm in leaving the enrollment open because the student's still there. You would just know in these cases that because they weren't eligible, they're not in the proportionate share calculation. Pam, you're asking the question, but only for that year, right? Okay. If they're not eligible, then we would not expect to see that student return for purposes of calculating proportionate share. Now, we're talking, by the way, about potentially, and again, this is not guidance. We're just throwing this around, in our discussions in the proportionate share work group. Should we have districts reaffirm that a student is actively enrolled in a private school the subsequent academic year? Would it be necessary? Okay, so we haven't made that decision. Based on what I'm telling you right now, for that year that they're assessed, leave the enrollment open. Okay, as long as you're able to extract those data from 3 prior years right now, you should be okay. Kelly Ellison at 205. There are 4 columns for tax exempt. To make sure I understand, any of these columns has a yes. Does that mean they are non-profit? This is a good question. Shelly, send this in as a service ticket. Yeah, it's from the spreadsheet. I just want to make sure I've got to confirm with our private school office on which of these are for and nonprofit. And Audrey's answering, I believe, tax exempt column combines the previous 3 columns. Okay, so typically if they're tax exempt, it means they're nonprofit, I believe. But we can confirm if you want to go ahead and send in a service ticket. All right, we got 14 more to go. I think I can get it done. Monica, oh, that was the very first question. Okay, Anonymous 208. Did you answer the question about consent to exchange information forms you mentioned earlier by chance? About consent to exchange information. Well, not really sure. So Anonymous, could you elaborate on this question? I don't know if I really understand the question. So if you're still on, if you could elaborate, I would appreciate it. Okay, Tiffany at 208. By when should the LEAs have updated the exit codes for all of the nonprofit private schools in the past 3 years to E170s? It's expected to be done by fall 1. So no, it is not. It is, this is really a local decision because it's when you are required to submit your proportionate share calculations for this upcoming year, right? You should have it done before then. Because what you want to make sure is so no, don't worry. It's not, you're not on sort of a fall 1 deadline, right? It's just when they get ready to do the proportionate share calculations, it's really important that the underlying data they're going to use for those calculations is correct so that they can accurately report those numbers. Anonymous at 215. How does Capistrano legal case impact what you said about a requirement to hold an annual review of ISP? I'm assuming the Capistrano case that you're talking about is that if a parent is declining services that you would not be, the district is not required to annually hold an IEP. I believe that's what you're talking about. And again, if the parent's declining services, no, you are not required to annually hold an IEP or an ISP review. And I believe that that's what you're talking about. If it's not, go ahead and submit a service ticket. You're only required an annual review of an ISP if that student's actively on an ISP. But that may be not what you were asking. So if it wasn't, please send in a service ticket and we'll get it answered. Tammy Pyers at 215. If our reports pull blank, do we assume that we have 0 students in private schools for this purpose? Okay, that's a great question. And that is that is something that you're going to have to confirm within your special education data systems and talk to your special education directors. Okay. Because as I said, when I went back and looked at these data, a lot of times they're not creating private school enrollments for these kids. They're putting them in district level enrollments. They're also putting them in their schools of residence. So in these cases, Tammy, just to double check, I would check with your special education directors to confirm that there were no assessments conducted for students in private schools within the district. And if there were, then it means there's a problem with the way that you guys are submitting the data. Stacy Moyer at 16. On the CDE website, I got 2 different lists of private schools. Which should I use? Stacy, I would need to know which list. So the slide deck actually contains the 24-25 list of private schools and status. So if you want to use the most recent list, I would advise that you use the link at the bottom of the page. There are different lists by academic year, and then I believe there's also another list made available on that page, but I would use the one that I put on the slide at the very bottom of that slide. Okay, Lisa Nuxton at 217. If students who are found eligible for special education but elect not to have an ISP are included in the correctly placed in private school calculation, how can these funds be spent? There's potential that several students are assessed, but none have an active service plan. So I can't tell you exactly what the OSEP or the IDEA law, the intent of it is. But I mean, here's what I can tell you is if you've got students that you are serving in, or not serving, but are enrolled in private schools within your district who are found eligible for services, the intent is that you have to set aside a proportionate share of funds in case those students elect to be served because they're already found eligible, right? That's why many of these parents declined, but because they were found eligible, you still have to put those funds aside, okay? Then there's a 27-month period that you have for expenditure of those funds. If those funds have not been expended, then as long as the district or the SELPA notifies CDE, those funds can be released if they were not utilized for those students to serve them on individualized service plans. Okay, Mark being at 217. If the student is attending a private nonprofit school, will the enrollment line remain open throughout the school year, whether they are found eligible or not eligible? And the answer is yes. That is what I'm recommending. Are we going to require that you do that? No. But if you want to extract your data correctly for proportionate share calculations, that is what would be necessary. That's what we're recommending. Anonymous at 220. For a student who is a resident of our district, but was unilaterally withdrawn by a parent and enrolled in a private school located in a different district, what are our compliance responsibilities regarding, number one, are we formally required to notify the district of location of the student's enrollment in a private school within the boundaries? So are you required? No. Is it best practice to help your neighboring districts with their child find responsibility? Yes. It is ultimately the responsibility, however, of the district of location to conduct child find within those private schools. 2, records custody. Which district maintains the official special education record in SACE or the state's data system for reporting and compliance purposes? So if the student is in a private school in the district of location, then that district is responsible for maintaining their record in the special education data system as long as they are eligible and specifically if they are participating. Danielle Love at 221. Clarification. If a student is found eligible, but parents decline FAPE, and ISP and requests declines the FAPE and ISP and requests an evaluation in 3 years, this is an initial, not a reeval. And that's correct, right? Because reevaluations are typically only when a student has been participating. In these cases, if they decline from jump, it's technically a subsequent initial. Ariel Garcia at 222. If private school triennials are considered new initials, are we still responsible for following up every 3 years to conduct an evaluation? Or if and only if the parent reaches out to request an evaluation within that time frame or beyond. So I would say for the initial period in which they're considered eligible, so they have that initial evaluation, and then they have technically an eligibility period of 3 years, and you conduct a subsequent initial, or you're trying to conduct a subsequent initial. Again, you have to get parental consent for that evaluation. Okay. After that time period, if the parent doesn't consent to that subsequent initial after 3 years, then you would not be required, because at that point they would be not eligible because parent didn't consent to the assessment. In the other case, the parent consented to the assessment, child was determined to be eligible. Okay, so which is the reason you're following up after 3 years to say, hey, let's reevaluate. Let's see, do you want services now? But if they don't consent to that subsequent initial or reeval in this case, then they would be not eligible. Anonymous at 233. Looking at the private schools 24-25 Excel document shared in the presentation, our district doesn't have a private school on this list. Since we are not a district of location, there are no action items for us. Yeah, if you don't have any private schools within your district, now the only possible private school that you could potentially have is, what if you have the school-age students or preschool-age students that are being homeschooled, and that homeschool meets specific criteria. That's technically a private school. But if you don't have any private schools in that list, then technically there wouldn't be any action unless, again, you had students that were homeschooled, or the other scenarios that I told you before is when you have a parentally placed student in a non-NPS school. So if they're parentally placed there and not through the IEP process, they're technically in a private school. Anonymous at 236. Is the enrollment considered open if the student is found eligible and not participating? Enrollment open in SACE and in areas as well. So yeah, I would, again, it's recommendation. You don't have to do it, but my recommendation is that you leave those enrollments open regardless of whether or not they're found, they're participating or not. Okay, I would advise that you leave it open because, again, that enrollment is a representation that the student is enrolled in a private school within your district during that academic year. That's it. That's all. Anonymous at 238. Why can't private schools do their own assessments and report enrollments in CALPADS? Because private schools do not get public school money, and that is part of Child Find, and that's part of the district of location's responsibility through Child Find. So I realize that would be ideal, but has not happened yet. Tammy Eck at 238. A lot of information. Can you please confirm the district of special education accountability when a student lives outside of the district of location? My brain is fading. Yeah, this is a really good question as well, and I think we've kind of tried to answer it a couple times. And before I give you bad information, Tammy, can I just ask you to send this in as a service ticket, because I'd like to get confirmation from people above my pay grade. Thank you. Anonymous at 239. If you're using the SWDS for the 3-year info for proportionate share, then you would actually need to confirm that the student re-enrolled in that same private school each year and did not move since you exit at the end of each school year and re-enroll in the fall. So you would need to confirm enrollment for eligible not participating each year, even if you use the SWDS, correct? Alternately, you enrolled a student each year in the private school group with an eligible not participating. So these are really good questions. The first part of it is you're absolutely right, right? You're pulling those SWDS data, eligible not participating, and the private school enrollments for a 3-year period. But one of the things about meaningful consultation with your private schools in these cases is, and that's a missing piece. We know that that's not happening in a lot of districts. Districts are not reaching out and saying, hey, is this kid still enrolled with you? Yes or no? Okay. Yes, they're still enrolled. Okay, perfect. Because again, if they're still enrolled, they should be counted for purposes of proportionate share annually for that 3-year period. Okay. Now, with respect to, should I be submitting an enrollment for that student annually if I know they're still enrolled? Those are questions that we're going to address with the proportionate share work group. We don't want to put that guidance out there yet. Okay, that's a possible recommendation, but we're, it's not fully vetted yet. Anonymous at 243, how can I find out the list of private schools that Riverside Unified is responsible for providing services? So Milo, could you post that link to the private schools page and the private schools data? So there was a slide specifically on this.
Sure.
It's a private school. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay, will do. Thanks, Brandy.
Appreciate it. Okay, Autumn Irvin at 245. We would really love for clearer guidance on the private homeschool students and how CDE would like us to report these students. Do we not offer ISP and mark them as eligible not participating? And do we remove them from our special education data system when we do this, or keep them to track them? This kind of loops back to my other question. Yeah, so this, Autumn, I agree with you. This is kind of an area that's not really clear. And so I will work with some of our consultants to see if we can get better guidance out to the field. So this, we hear you. Anonymous at 245, the majority of our funds are spent on students under 5. We don't offer ISPs. We make an offer of FAPE, but they would only qualify if they choose to enroll at one of our schools. Do we count these? Okay, so Anonymous at 245, my assumption is you're the district of residence, but you also happen to be the district of location. I would be very careful about saying we don't offer ISPs. Please understand that if that student resides within a private school within your district, you are required to offer services if the parent elects. So I would never say we don't offer ISPs. Okay, so because that is part of your IDEA requirements. If they're eligible and the parent is electing, you should be able to serve them through an individualized service plan. You can't just say we don't do it. Carrie Novo at 246. Are we still sending an annual offer of FAPE if the parent declines services when they withdraw and enroll in the private school? Do we need to send out an annual offer each year? So this is a local decision. I do believe that there was a court case that said if the parent intends to keep the student enrolled in the private school, then the district of residence is not required to make an annual offer of FAPE. But if that is a local process that you use, by all means, you can. Audrey Shepard at 247, must homeschools be nonprofit private schools for children to be evaluated? Right, so they have to actually meet specific criteria. The homeschools have to meet specific criteria in order to be counted for purposes of proportionate share. And again, I'll work with some of our consultants to see if we can get better guidance on that, on how you identify that, right? Okay, anonymous at 248. If parent agrees with eligibility and declines FAPE and service plan for 1 year, we still have to offer service plan the following year because the service plan can change and parent may want the service plan. So my understanding is if they decline, you are not required to annually make that offer. But if you have a local process in which your SELPA is recommending that, or you have local legal counsel recommending that you do that, then I would follow that local process. Anonymous at 253. I might get there, guys. I got 4 open questions, assuming none of you submit anymore. Did you answer the question about consent to exchange? Okay, yeah. That one I did not get on that one. So anonymous at 253. If a student is eligible, parent declines FAPE and service plan, we continue to offer a service plan every year, but the next evaluation is considered an initial. Why not a try? Parent agreed to eligibility. So parent agreed to eligibility, but they're not participating in special education. So here's what I will tell you. If you guys submit these up as reevaluations, CALPADS is not going to kick it back. I'm just saying that technically it's an initial, and you actually have to get parent consent for what you're calling a reevaluation. So in terms of, from a data perspective, those records are not going to be rejected. So if it comes up as a 10 or it comes up as a 40, either of those is acceptable. Okay, anonymous at 254. What if the school is not on either list, but has been in operation for several years? How do we consider their status as nonprofit or profit? I would reach out to the private school if you're aware of it. Definitely reach out to them, ask them what their tax exempt status is, if they're for profit or nonprofit. And honestly, it's not clear to me. I believe private school affidavits are how the CDE, how they get on that CDE's list. So what I would encourage you to do is when you're working with that private school, because still you're required to do it, right? It's a private school within your boundaries. You're aware of it. You're required to do meaningful consultation. So reach out to that private school and say, hey, I noticed you weren't on the CDE list. Have you filed a private school affidavit? Okay, so they can get the information updated on the CDE list, but you would definitely need to reach out to the private school in this case. High hand at 257. How and when will we get answers to the questions that will be submitted? I'm not sure what you mean, High. The questions that will be submitted.
I think Brandy is referring to, or he or she, I apologize if I'm wrong, the questions that we're asking for tickets for.
Oh, if you send in a ticket, my team typically responds pretty quickly, and we can work together to get responded within, a few days. Sometimes, by the way, we're going to have to reach out to other people, and in some cases, we'll actually have to reach out to legal. So it might take a little bit, but I promise we'll get you the answers as quickly as possible. And
will we be taking those answers and aggregating them kind of in a Q&A document like we've done before?
We can.
Okay.
We can. Yeah, that's certainly a great idea. You can put that on your list.
It should not have come off mute.
Yeah. Again, guys, if you submit a service ticket, I promise you will get an answer back. Okay. Woo. Will the Q&A be available? Yeah, we can certainly make the Q&A available to the people that registered and attended today. Okay, it would be great if questions submitted could be sent to attendees or available through another route. Yeah, I mean, we could probably compile a document like Dominic said, and it may result in a frequently asked questions document. Confirmed, SELPA does not. SELPA does the proportionate share calculation, not the LEA. That's correct. Yes, but as Audrey points out, it requires collaboration with the LEAs because SELPAs don't have direct access to your data. All right, last question. Should enrollments be created for subsequent years for eligible and not participating, or do we just keep them open? So right now, Derek, I would just keep them open for the year in which they're evaluated and identified. We're not making a recommendation right now that you annually submit these enrollments, okay? Again, we're working with the Proportionate Share Workgroup to kind of develop some of these recommendations. I want to make sure that it's fully vetted before we tell you that that's what you need to do. And my last thing that I'm just going to point out is that, again, I'm giving you recommendations to help you pull these data out of CALPADS. Before CALPADS existed, you guys, you had to calculate these data some other way, okay? And it was probably a combination of data in CaseMIS and also data from your local special education data systems. We realized that you guys were using CALPADS data to calculate proportionate share, but you couldn't do it effectively because of the way the data are collected and some of the guidance that we gave you. So now I'm telling you, if you want to use CALPADS, make these modifications in the last 3 years of data for private school enrollments, and you'll effectively be able to pull those students out and then count them accurately. But again, it's a local decision on your part. But in order to do that, you will need to make some modifications to your data. Okay, and are we able to keep enrollment open for private school student not on an ISP? No, it will not create an error, as long as they have a meet record from your district. Okay, it is 3 o'clock, and I'm sorry for those of you that I totally lied to and said this was only going to be an hour. The questions took an hour at least, right? But thank you, 334 people, for sticking around to the very end. I hope that it was helpful. I know you're going to have lots of questions afterwards, but just remember, we will be posting this recording on the CSIS YouTube channel as soon as we get the transcript cleaned up. We will also be working on apparently a frequently asked questions document that we will disseminate and to all of the attendees, as well as sending out the Q&A from this specific session to those that attended the webinar. So thank you so much for your attention this afternoon, and we will talk to you soon.